Since How to Train Your Dragon's finally getting the respect it deserves, we're going to be making Hiccup's fire sword. So first thing, we're going to do an object track in Blender so that we have a sword to emit from. Now when it comes to object tracking, there's the technically right way of doing it, and then there's the actual way that you're going to do it. The actual way that you do it is you sort of hacky point track parts of the image that you can, and then you eyeball it for the rest of it. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to load in our footage. You can practice along in the download or try the other shot as well. Once we have our shot loaded, we can set scene frames, and we could even prefetch if you want to, so that it loads seamlessly. Now for this shot, we're just going to place a tracking marker right on the base of the hand. Make it nice and big. And the track doesn't have to be super accurate. It just has to generally follow what's going on in the shot, because we're going to parent our 3D object to this and then do another layer of keyframing on top of that. Now a tracking point basically has two different ways of thinking. There's keyframe and previous frame. If you have it set to keyframe, it's going to take a reference frame, and then every frame after that, it will only count it depending on how close it is to the reference frame, set by this margin. So if it's like 75% there, it's like, yeah, that's the same point. If you tried that on this shot though, you'd probably lose it. As we can see, we lost it after 9 frames. One thing we can try with this is previous frame. Now usually that's less accurate and you don't really want to do it as much because it's going to be like a game of telephone where it just keeps drifting. But in this case, we don't care too much about accuracy, so we'll just go with it. We're going to track up to the point where it goes off screen, and then we just got to move ahead to where it comes back in screen. And then we can just keep tracking forward. This is all the data we need, so what we're going to do is go to solve, and we don't need to solve the camera motion or anything because we're not going to. All we have to do is select link empty to track. If you look up in the 3D scene, that will place an empty right where it's at. We can set this to be the background image so we can see what's going on. Good stuff. Now what we're going to do is turn this cube into an approximate blade type shape. And this object is what is going to be emitting our flames. You'll want to position the origin point at the bottom of the box. Kind of get this into position, make it more sword shaped. Now that we have our sword, all we have to do is parent it to our tracking point. You can do keep transform. As you can see, that helps out, but it's going to be all drifty. And then of course there's this section right here in the middle. So now what we're going to do is enable the auto keyframing. And we are just going to go through the timeline, and anytime it drifts off the object, line it up. It's actually a much faster process than it sounds. Now, once we get to this frame, I'm just gonna mark the last frame where it doesn't move, and then I'm gonna manually just move it out of frame. I even just delete that middle one. Move ahead to where it comes back into frame, and then you just line it up. You're gonna notice this jump that happens when it picks up the next keyframe. So a simple way to deal with that is we're gonna eyeball it like we eyeball everything. To get that into the right spot, you can do Shift S and click cursor to selected, and then go back 1 frame and do Shift S and then hit selected to cursor. Now there won't be any movement between those frames. We can grab it and move it up out of picture. It's gonna jump for 1 little frame, so you might wanna just tweak it a little bit. It's floaty. Too floaty. Another thing that can help is if what's outside of the frame is kind of messing with you, you can just go down to viewport display and turn passport all the way up. That way you can really actually get a good idea of what's happening. Now we're just going to keep going through. Now that was done in a matter of minutes. Now that was done in a matter of minutes, but we are not making gray block swords, are we? We're making fire swords. So it's time for Embergen, yes, Ember. It's actually not time for Embergen. Before we do that, we have to export this. Make sure you have the blade selected and shift select the camera. Then go to File, Export, Alembic. Set your save destination and hit Selected Only. Name it and export. Alright, so when we open up Embergen, this is what we see. It's node-based, so if you've not used it before, it's pretty straightforward actually. We got all these nodes over here, so we have like the input shape and stuff, and the emitter and the shaders, and they all do different things, going from left to right. And whenever you select a node, the information for it appears down here. But what we're going to do is add an import node, so if you just right-click, go import. And with the import node selected, we got to go down to File Path and then select our Alembic file. It might take a minute to import, but whenever you do, a new thing appears on this timeline. It's this little import box. So that's the frames of our animation. And right here, this emitter volume, it's using this shape to drive the emitters. But if we just select the geometry here and plug it into shapes and unplug this one, we should see the sword pop up. Yeah, there it is. It's really tiny right now, but we're going to make it bigger. Down here, we can play with the master scale. And then you'll notice there's the domains of the animation. Right now it's looping as well. You see it jump every now and then. So we don't want it to do that. So we'll just uncheck loop. So it just starts and then it ends. The time speed of it is off. We'll get to that in a minute. But first we're going to plug in the camera. So let's drag the camera option down at the bottom and plug it into the camera node. And so if we select that, that's where the camera's at. That's the same camera that we exported from Blender. And up here under the views, if we select default and we go to camera 1, now it's the right angle. The aspect ratio is all wrong. We can change it down here. We can also import our video as a background. So just click use backplate. You're going to have to use an image sequence for some reason. Just make sure you have your plates exported. I usually just do an export of JPEG so they run fast, because I don't need them for any quality. I just need to make sure they line up in the scene. Of course. We just locate our file and then we'll click animated backplate. So now we can see our footage and it lines up with the simulation. So a few things about this. We don't want the animation to start right on the first frame, because if so, then when the shot starts, the fire's just gonna poof into place. And we kind of want the simulation to have already been going by the time the shot starts. So we're just gonna offset the first frame of this, maybe 20 or something. And you notice when you do that, the background doesn't start right away, but the simulation does. We'll also need to offset our animation over in the import node. If you go to playback, you can offset the start time of the animation. So we can just type in 20. And now when we hit play, it syncs up. Now this is a slow-mo shot, and you'll notice the flames are kind of going too fast for this. And I need to talk about this because the way time works in Embergen is actually a little weird, because it doesn't just let you simulate it and output a 24 FPS video. To understand it, if you go to the simulation node and time control, it basically has a simulation time of 60 hertz per second. This is not only the speed of the simulation, but it's also kind of the temporal resolution of it. So if we make the number lower, like 24, the flames are going to go faster, but there'll be these little like subframe artifacts that you see. Here we can make it lower and really just mess with this nuclear blade. So if we make it higher, like 120, now you'll see the simulation is in slow motion. But also when you go to export this, it will export 120 frame per second animation. So for example, the original footage was around 150 frames, but for this to export a simulation that crosses the span of the entire shot, it would be over 800 frames it's outputting. What you can do to get around it is have this frame stride, so it basically skips every other frame. And that's one solution. It's a very strange workflow though, and honestly something that probably deserves its own tutorial. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. But yeah, so now before we export, there's a few things we want to do. Right, it's kind of drifty up. I feel like we can tinker around. Like if we make it really hot or not, we can tinker with the fuel emission. And then before we export, I kind of want to change the resolution of this around. Let's see, 0.05. I kind of want to change the resolution to get these little high frequency details. We just got to make sure the simulation has the bounds of our animation, so I might need to widen the y-axis. That's looking all right. A lot of these settings you can play with and see what works and what does what. Simulations really are an iterative process where you tweak something and run it and see how it looks, and you eventually get it toward what you're going for. But this will be good enough for now. So if we go over to export, select the little render tab, and the export has two different options. There's flipbook and sequence. Flipbook you don't want because it'll put it all into one image. So we're going to do sequence. Set the resolution. Turn the frame stride down actually. We're going to turn up the number of frames. 150 I think is what we were going for. We can try that. I'm not sure if my math adds up. Try that. If it doesn't work, these actually render very fast, so it's kind of a non-issue. Set your output file. Set your output destination, and then you just hit export. Now we got the shot. We got the flames. There's one last step before this frame. In After Effects, we'll take our file and we'll just put our flame render on top of it. These dimensions aren't matching, so we'll just make them match up and see what happens when you set the mode to screen. Now, speaking of the wrong way of doing things, if you did your math wrong in Embergen and you notice the shot doesn't line up, ideally, of course, you want to simulate it right. But a little trick to get around that is you can go to time and enable time remapping and just make sure the beginning of the shot and the end of the shot match. Again, ideally you synced it up right in Embergen, but in case you didn't, that's a quick little hack to do, and then it'll sync up. Now it's just a little sharp, so we're gonna add a fast box blur. We're gonna add just a tiny amount of blur. We can duplicate the layer, and on this layer on top, increase the blur to create a much wider glow. You can even do it a third time and make the glow even wider, because maybe it's humid out. Next, you can add some heat distortion. Now, I know there's plugins that do this better, but if you don't have that, you can just do a quick little hack. Add an adjustment layer and mask around where the heat is going to be. Make sure the mask is wide and follows with the sword. Then you could add a turbulent displace, tweak around with the scale and the amount till it looks right, and you can animate the evolution of it. That'll add those tiny little ripples. Now there's no motion blur on the flame, so you can add a motion blur. And then lastly, I had this little lens flare element that I added in and tinted yellow, just to make it look like the sword's really glaring. You can adjust that to taste. Now, if you want to try recreating this from scratch, I have another video clip that you can use that would have its own challenges, so you can practice your own version of this. Quick little note. In the movie, he has little drips that come off of it. You can simulate that effect by just having particles that come off of our base mesh to get a render layer. I did that though, and it didn't really improve the shot that much, so, you know, you can skip it, save time. Or be extra, up to you.